And so you testified in court. Your father was sitting there?
What's that?
Was your father sitting there while you testified in court?
So I testified for 2 days at his trial, staring that man down. And you want to know something? He never would look me in the eye.
He never looked at you while you were testifying?
Wouldn't look at me at all.
Did he love you?
My mother used to say, your father loves you in his own sick, weird way. Maybe part of it. I think that my father, because he's a narcissist and a psychopath, but psychopaths are narcissists, not narcissists are psychopaths, if that makes sense. But because he has that extreme narcissism, that of course he loves me in that very superficial way, that I'm, from his loins, I'm his son, so therefore. But at the same time, my father for sure hates me.
He hates you?
100%.
And why do you say that?
My father has even said and admitted to people, I mean, his anger is vitriol. I read his letters on my podcast that he sent me over the years to expose like narcissism, manipulation. Like I have 400 of his letters. But I also have letters that he sent to other people talking about me as an adult. I recently just got a letter that he had written and said something about me where when my film was released and talking about me. Yeah, my father holds massive anger towards me because he feels
love you, though?
Because he feels that I put him in prison. Like I said, in his own weird way, maybe, sure.
And do you love him?
I love him.
Have you forgiven him?
100%.
You told
that
him?
was the first. So that's an interesting thing because, and like I said, I watched some of your stuff, and I think that there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding around forgiveness. And I remember I was one of my first jobs as a cinematographer, I was shooting these motorcycle stunt riders, and I was in the Dominican Republic. And we were in this hotel, and it was like 120 degrees and humid. And I was telling them the story because when I moved to LA, like I said, I didn't create a new identity, but no one knew my story. A few of my close friends knew his dad murdered his mom. He heard it happen. He was adopted. That's from Ohio. Like that's very surface details.
Yeah.
But I was sitting there and I was talking because my father was up for parole, and I had taken the job so I could go back to Ohio because they were from Ohio, so I could see my father in prison. Because you have to understand, I also maintained a relationship with my father for 26, 27 years while he was incarcerated. I would go and see him, and I was explaining to them that I forgave him, and they were like, "Well, how could you do that?" But I was like, "How can you do that?" I was like, You're looking at this through the wrong lens. It's not about him. It's about me. And me saying, what you did has no power over me anymore. What you did to my mother has no power over me. I'm not condoning it. You're wrong. You did this. But I forgive you for that.
You told him that?
Yeah, 100%.
And so you faced him and told him you forgive him?
Of course I did.
And what did he say?
He said, thank you.
Oh, good.
I do forgive him. I don't like him. I don't like what he did,
right.
But he's my father.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that a lot of people just find it so difficult to understand. How can you love him? How can you do this? Well, guess what? You've never been in my shoes. You don't know what that's like.
That's right.
You don't know what it's like. It's very complicated.
Yeah.
It is a cognitive dissonance in its purest form. So I think that is something that I see that holds a lot of people back. And on my podcast, when I share all of this, is how I impact the world, is showing that compassion and that forgiveness. I'm not trying to sound messianic or anything, but it's just, it really is empowering. But it's one of those things, if you don't know until you really realize it, like how much that empowers, having that grace to do that. It doesn't mean you back down or you do anything. It's that you lead with this compassion and operate your life in such a way that reflects that.
How old were you when you forgave him?
It's probably like fully. So I was 13 when I wrote him a letter that I read in the film to him, because I confront him in prison. Because you have to understand that I made this film, A Murder in Mansfield, because I wanted to find out why he murdered my mother. I wanted to hear him. I wanted to figure this out, because I thought that was sort of the last remaining piece of my journey. Like, this will put all this to bed. And then I had to really realize that the answer is not what you need. What if the answer you seek is not the answer you need? Ultimately, it's the process. It's not the finish line. It's the marathon that you're running. It's the journey. But I wrote him a letter when I was 13 asking him to admit his guilt, and for the sake of our family, so we could all move on. So, because I have a half sister that was born 12 days before he was arrested.
This is the adopted sister, right?
No, I have a half sister too.
Oh,
so I have an adopted sister from Taiwan, and then there's another one, who's my half sister. And so my father's daughter with the mistress, and I asked him. I said, for her sake, for all of our sakes, just admit it. Come clean. It's all you have to do. And he opened the letter. He put it back in the envelope. He wrote refused on it, and he sent it back to me. So in my film, I opened that letter. I hadn't seen it since I sent it to him when I was 13 years old, and I read it to him. Again, posing those same questions. It's interesting because in that particular scene, you see, you see my father, because my father thought, because he's a narcissist, as his core, that I was making a film to help him get out of prison, which is why he participated in it.
So your father's actually in the movie talking about this? Really?
I sit with him just like you and I are sitting right here.
Wow. Was that hard for you to do it?
I mean, no. I mean, that's like one of those moments. That's like, LeBron breaking the scoring title. That is that moment in your life where you're sitting down and you're like, I went from there to here, and here we are now, and this is my moment. But again, as you'll see in the film, I say to him, why don't you be honest with me? Because it's not just my life, it's your life that's at stake here. It's your freedom. Because my father was going to be up for parole again. And it's like, if he could admit, because how I had sold it to the Department of Corrections to let me film there, is that I said, if my father will admit his guilt, it'll be this big shining moment, prodigal son returns, and then it'll be this big forgiveness moment. What I didn't tell them is that I know he's a narcissist and he probably won't do that. And he didn't. It's hidden beneath the layers of self-protection and narcissism. And here's this man who tormented me my entire life, who I'm extending the grace to yet again, saying, I'm giving you an opportunity here. And he just fumbles the ball at the 1 yard line.
Was it, that's interesting, man, so how old are you now?
45.
And what made you stop going to visit him?
Well, when I went into with the film, when he leaves the room, it was interesting. I was being interviewed by the New York Times, and the guy said, he's like, I watched your film, and he said, the one moment that sticks out of me out of the whole thing is after your father's telling you all this, and obviously he's lying, and he's just in this whole thing. He said, you stand up and you hug him and you say, I love you, Pop. He's like, you saying that to your father tells me everything I need to know about you and your character as a human being. It's like, I don't know anyone that would ever do that in that situation. And I was like, well, yeah, I do love my father.
Do you miss him?
And yeah, but I mean, like, what am I missing? In a lot of ways, like, the thing is that he's never been the person I've wanted him to be. He's never been a person that genuinely cared about me. The problem is when you're dealing with a psychopath, everything is transactional. So everything is calculated and transactional. He wants something from me. That's the only reason why he's talking to me. The only reason why he does it, it's I'm a cog in the machine to him.
What was it?
And that, by the way, was the hardest thing to accept. And that's what I really realized in that moment in the prison, in the film, right there.
It was hard to accept that he was just about himself.
That my relationship had always been transactional with him, and that's what it was about.
Oh, I see.
That's what I realized.
What did your mother do wrong in their relationship, the reason that he was so mean to her?
Well, my father's a narcissist, so
What did she do wrong?
so it doesn't. Everything that she did was wrong, and ultimately, when she said that she's divorcing him and leaving him, that was the ultimate wrong for him. That's why he took her life.
No, what was it? Oh, this is what I want to ask first, and then I'll come back to that.
Are you asking? Was my mother a saint and my father's the devil? No, of course not. It takes two to tango.
Right. Did you need your father to admit it in order to forgive him?
No, because I forgave him long before he ever admitted it to me. I forgave him probably like when I was in college. I wrote him that letter. He sent it back to me when I was 13. And I think it was around 18, 19 when I was in college. Like, you're on your own and you're really reflecting on like what your life's going to look like. And I wasn't necessarily like holding on to a lot of anger because I've never done that. But I was, whatever was there, I was like, man, you got to let this shit go. Like, whatever's there, because that's going to affect you in your life, and you don't want that.
So why did you need him to admit it, and why were you trying so hard to get him to admit it if you had forgiven him?
Well, because I thought that was like the final nail in the coffin for me to like completely move on with my life, because I wanted answers, and I was like, oh, I really want this answer. It just felt like my whole life had led up to that moment that I'm confronting him. And then that's when I realized that I don't need that at all.
Right.
Like, I'm good. Probably here's the real thing that is really gonna twist your mind, is if he did do that, if he did say, well, you know what, I killed her because I did this, that probably would have led to way more questions and way more self-doubt and way more just going down a rabbit hole of everything than it was to realize that he's not capable of that and that we are two completely different people.